Well, good morning. Oh, not good morning, good evening. And welcome to tonight's Let's Talk About webinar. Tonight we're dealing with the hot topic of singleness. So before we get going with tonight's material, would you just take a moment to share this with your friends? Tonight is not just for those who are single, but it's also designed to deal with how should people treat singles. So if you're getting pressure from family, friends, if you have anyone who you know could be blessed or could benefit from tonight, why don't you share with them the link, the Vimeo link that you're watching from, and that's going to hopefully bless them, help you. So take a moment to do that. Later on, we're also going to have a Q&A. We've got a panel tonight. We're going to have a panel with people from all different stages of life, whether we've got someone who's in their 20s, and single. We've got someone who has only recently been married later on in life. We also have Pastor Benny who will be answering some questions. So hopefully we'll get a really nice rounded perspective and something helpful for this topic. So without any further ado, let's get into tonight's content. Pastor Benny, would you take it away?
Okay. Well, I'm excited to be sharing with you tonight on this very important topic. If I can retitle it, you will be single for a season or single for a reason. And I think this is a very interesting topic. Now, many years ago, I was on a mission trip with a brother who is single, and I took the opportunity to ask him to write down some things that we should avoid when we are actually dealing with singles. And he did. He took that time during our trip to actually write some things down. And I want to read some of the things that he wrote that I think we see if you would agree with his comments. He said, if he could make an appeal to all of us who are married and all of us who are out there, he said, please stop making comments like, how come you're still single? What's wrong with you? So when's your turn? Don't be so choosy, just go for it. No partner. Can I make an introduction? Stuff like all these comments can be very, very pressurizing for the single person. I wonder if you would agree. If you agree, why don't you put it on the chat and just let Dave know that, yes, stop that. Well, there are several sources where I think such pressures can come from, and just to give us some framework in which we can hang our thoughts and then we can ask the panel later on, here are 3 primary pressure points that can come if you are single. Number 1 would be family and friends. I think one of the most pressurizing moments would come, especially during New Year's reunion parties or Christmases or at weddings, where your family and friends, out of good intention, they will come and all the relatives will come around and they ask you that $1 million question. So when are you settling down? Your parents are looking forward to having grandkids, And another one of those moments will be wedding dinners, that invariably someone will come up and ask, so when's your turn next? And they think that it's a conversation starter, but to you, it's a point of pressure. Now, sometimes I want to just shout at all these aunties and uncles and want to tell them, I want to shout at them and say, when they ask, when's your turn next, I want to be able to say, well, coming soon. Well, when are you going to get rid of a few pounds? Something like that. And I think family and friends is one pressure point. Here's another one, society and trends. Now, it is unfortunate that the single lifestyle is still being portrayed as a constant state of dissatisfaction. TV shows like Ally McBeal, Friends, Sex and the City, they're all about unhappy singles. They're on a constant pursuit of a perfect partner, but just somehow couldn't close the deal. And the quest just goes on, episode after episode. And it also does not help when the church fails to celebrate the season of singleness and actually affirm singlehood as a God-ordained season of life. In fact, I want to take this opportunity to thank all the young single adults that are in all of our churches, because you guys are making tremendous contribution to the church during this season of singleness because of your total and complete devotion unto the Lord. And I think that is something to be celebrated, that we should celebrate. And let me take this opportunity just to say to all of you who are single and serving and pouring your heart out for the church, a big thank you and a big shout out to you. So 1, family and friends. Number 2, society and trends. Here's the third one. I think it's biological and the physical band. Now, sometimes the pressure can actually come from the fact that your physical time clock is ticking. If you like, the urge to merge, becomes stronger as time goes on. And this, coupled with the tendency to compare your state with those of your friends who are happily married, can be overwhelming. Now, all these are pressure points that are very, very real. My question would be, how do singles actually cope with them? Now, here is what I found to be 4 typical responses that singles would take when they come under all this pressure. One would be, we end up taking what's there. We just take what's there. And this is one of the most common responses. We press the panic button and we take whatever comes along. And as time drags on, that mindset of beggars cannot be choosers actually just kicks in. And people end up just picking up potential prospects, in chat rooms, dating apps, pubs, etc. And people jump into relationships with anyone who is willing. And in settings like this, guys can just end up offering love for sex, and girls actually end up offering sex for love. And the result can only be disastrous. Or at best, you end up not actually finding a true soulmate. And I've seen several cases myself where people get married after a few short months of dating, and then they get married. But after that, all the hidden skeletons in their life just begin to emerge. Now, we need to always remember that what we are looking for is Mr. Right, not Mr. Right now. So don't rush into it. And I would challenge you, never compromise when it comes to the choice of a life partner. Okay, and it's far better, I think, to be single and alone than to be married and miserable because of a wrong choice of a life partner. So don't just take anyone, but choose the one that suits you. And remember, don't settle. Last week when I was talking about 10 keys to choosing a life partner, I make this point very strong. Don't settle when it comes to marriage. Marry only because you want to. In fact, if you are in a wrong relationship right now, you should get out. See, it will be better to get out of it. So, number 1, response, take what's there. Number 2, deny the desire. Another wrong way to deal with these pressure points is simply to deny the desire to find a life partner. But this can be unhealthy because we are seeking actually to suppress a God-given desire. I think it's better to acknowledge it, acknowledge the desire, and face up to the feelings that are there. And therefore, it is good to be able to find people that we can actually talk to, and then maybe journal some of these feelings and emotions down and share them with significant people who are like your trusted friends or your pastors, your spiritual leaders, your mentors. And in this way, we can then engage in this whole process of waiting upon the Lord and at the same time looking out for divine appointments that God can actually send along our way. So 1, take what's there. 2, deny the desire. The third thing people do, crawl into a cave. That's the third thing they do. They crawl into a cave. Some have actually given up on the search, and perhaps they have tried and failed. Perhaps they've been hurt before. Perhaps they've been rejected too many times. They completely just quit the search. They just bury themselves in their work and just spend time at home watching Netflix. I think the journey is just too hard and the journey is just too long. So let's just crawl into this dark, lonely cave and just watch TV. But I want to encourage you not to withdraw from this quest, but just resolve to live life to the fullest and keep an open mind and about what God may bring along your way. So it's not to take what's there, it's not to deny the desire, it's not to crawl into a cave, but it's not also to spiritualize the search. That's the fourth thing I found people doing, that there are also many single Christians who have actually spiritualized the entire quest for a soulmate. And we all end up making pious statements like, well, if God wants me to be married, He will send a man along my way. I'll just pray and wait and God will send someone to me. That's true, but there's another side to it, which I think is there must be a level also of our own engagement in this whole search. Others resort to, well, God told me you're the one I should marry nonsense. And then we just dump that on people. And if you ever feel this way, if you ever feel like God has spoken to you that that is the man you must marry, then please keep it to yourself and act like as if you have not heard nothing. Okay, and then just let God unfold things for you. And this is where we need to hold the tension between trusting God's leading, but yet at the same time being proactive in taking responsibility for the search of a life partner. And this may include making the necessary changes, like maybe change your hairstyle, buy a breath freshener, or drop a few excess pounds or kilos, use deodorant, take a crash course on how to win friends and influence people. There are practical things that we can do to actually put ourselves along the way, okay? And I think it's true. Now, this tension, I think, can be illustrated through 1 Corinthians 7, verse 27. And let me explain to you what I mean. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 27, the Apostle Paul, talking about marriage and singleness, said this. He said, "Are you married? Then do not seek a divorce. Are you unmarried?" He said, "Do not look for a wife." Now, that's interesting because the word look here in the Greek is actually the word zeteo, Z-E-T-E-O, which actually means to seek in order to find. And it comes with an element of a demand or a craving, if you like. There's a sense of desperation in that looking. And Paul actually tells us that if you are unmarried, then don't be desperate to get married. Don't be desperate to look for a wife. Now, you contrast that with Proverbs 18, verse 22, where you find almost a contradictory statement here. The wise man says, "He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord." Now, the key is this. The word find here in the Hebrew is the word matzah, which actually means to discover or to uncover or to cause to encounter, which actually means that it is something that happens in the course of life, in the course of things, rather than a desperate, demanding, craving search. See, and can you see the contrast there? And what the Apostle Paul is telling us, that we should not be on this desperate, craving, demanding search, but at the same time, in the course of things, when God uncovers, when God allows you to discover, then you have found a good thing. So you see that contrast there. And I think it's important to see where the pendulum needs to land. It's not to do absolutely zero and nothing and to be totally passive. It's also not to be desperate and craving, but it is to let God uncover as you go through and you live life to the fullest. In other words, it should come with a sense of God's timing and the unfolding of events. And thus, in our quest to find the one, we need to be proactive, but yet not demanding or craving or desperate. Okay, so now let me just quickly cover for you now so that you can probe your thinking and prompt you to ask the right questions. Here are 4 myths that concerning the search for the one that you need to marry. Now, here are 4 myths that we need to just demolish. Number 1 is this: there is only one perfect one for me. Now, many people are under the impression or under the notion that there is only one perfect one waiting for me out there. Do you know, if you say that, what you're literally saying is that out of the 7 billion people that are in this world, there is only one that is the perfect one. And if you missed it, then you missed it forever. Now, I talked about this last week, and I want to just, in case some of you here were not in that webinar, let me just remind you that this theory, even though it sounds very nice, I don't think it holds water. Let me illustrate for you what I mean, okay? Imagine, if you can, this is A and B, right? So, A and B is the perfect one. So, they are meant to be for each other the perfect one. But unfortunately, A did not marry B, but instead A married C, which is not the perfect one. And so this ends up not being the perfect one. But C is actually the perfect one for D, but because C is now married to A, so D can no longer be married to the perfect one. So what happened to D? He ends up marrying E, which is actually not the perfect one. But E actually is meant for F, but now because E is married to D, so F is no longer having the perfect one. So F end up marrying B, which is also imperfect. Now, if we're saying that there is only one perfect one that is waiting for you, and if you missed it, you missed it, then what we are saying literally is that all it needs is for us to have one joker who makes the mistake, and everybody else will have a domino effect, and the whole thing collapses. So what's my point? My point is, I don't think this theory holds water at all, and we need to pull down this myth. And last week we talked about, you should go back to the webinar from last week and catch the whole teaching on this. But I just want to tear down this myth that really there is no one perfect one. Here's another myth that you need to tear down. If I pray hard enough, God will send me the one. Is this true? I think it's yes and no. Now, prayer is absolutely necessary in our search for a life partner. And don't you even dare to try and do that without prayer. Because marriage is such a risky thing. How can we do it without prayer? You must first risk it before God in prayer. But prayer alone, without taking responsibility to be proactive in seeking out opportunities to meet people, etc., will not be effective. And especially, again, I just want to say to the guys in the church, that we are meant to be pursuers. So, pursue. And remember, the proof of the passion is in the pursuit. So as you pursue, if you're really passionate about wanting to get married, then pursue. And nowadays, it seems that all the men can be so passive. I just have a word for you brothers out there, just be a bit more proactive in your quest, okay? But the most frustrating thing to me is to see so many wonderful sisters waiting to be asked, and then all these guys doing nothing, and then the next thing you know, they're all going out with some non-Christian colleague, and I just feel like slapping some people. Anyway, that's a sidetrack. The key is not to let go and let God, but also to trust God and get going. So there is a part to play for every one of us. He who finds a wife really found a good thing. Okay, here's myth number 3. There is only one biblical way to find the one. I think the Bible offers principles that governs the good choice of a life partner. I shared 10 of them with you in last week's webinar. But the Bible is culturally sensitive also, and over the years, human sociology have changed. And it's hard to look for a definite approach in the search of a life partner because of cultural and historical settings. And we all need to understand that. Personally, I think a balanced approach would be great to engage. One good approach would be to engage in group dating. We get to know others in real-time situation until we think there's a possibility to actually explore a more long-term relationship. Now, besides, we tend to be more ourselves when we are in a group setting rather than a one-to-one, since we tend to act our best in a one-to-one setting. So from a group dating setting, we can then move on to more one-to-one dating courtship situation. So the one-to-one dating should also be done one at a time so that we are getting to know that person with the intent of pursuing a long-term relationship. Okay, now here's one last one, and then I will get down to the book of Corinthians. Now, the 4th myth is that there is someone for everyone. I think our society has put a very high premium on marriage, and rightly so, since the Bible actually treats marriage as sacred. However, we sometimes do it for the wrong reason, because the idea we communicate is that marriage is the only way to a life of fulfillment. But that is simply not true. It's just inadequate. And that is why singleness oftentimes is not seen as a legitimate way of life. But I think our satisfaction is not found in marriage, but our satisfaction is found in our union with God. Is marriage God's ultimate will for my life? I think not. But conformity to Jesus Christ is. So is marriage for everyone? I think not necessarily at this point. It may not be. Why? Because I think a person can be single for a season, or a person can be single for a reason. Now, I want to take you now to the book of 1 Corinthians, and I want to pull out some elements of it for you, and then from there, we will go into the webinar. Now, we'll go into the panel. Now, in the book of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul actually spent the first part of his letter challenging the Corinthians in various aspects of church life. And then from 1 Corinthians chapter 7 onwards, he began to answer specific questions that the church was asking. Now, the specific questions were directed at several pertinent issues that were going on in the church in Corinth. And they were all prefaced by one statement, which is now about this, now about marriage, now about being single. He talks about all the different aspects in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And you will find that the different topics he dealt with includes 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1. He talks about sex and marriage. Okay? In 1 Corinthians 7, verse 25, then he goes on to say, now about virgins and singers. Then in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1, now about food offered to idols. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1, now about spiritual gifts. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1, now about gifts and collection. So he dealt with different aspects. And what you need to understand as a context before we go into the verse, the city of Corinth is the sin city of the ancient world. The goddess that they worshipped in that city was Aphrodite, from where we get the word Aphrodite, which is the general term used for stuff like Viagra and all that to help people gain sexual powers. Now, in fact, the very name Corinth was used to denote fornicating, when people at that time would say they are Corinthianizing. So in other words, they are fornicating, they are Corinthianizing. In short, the city of Corinth was a city that was sex crazed. So that's the context of it. So how did the church then react to all this at that time? They reacted in two ways, and I want to just outline them for you. Number one is some will flow with the whole thing. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, the Bible tells us this. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality amongst you, and of a kind that does not occur even amongst pagans. So there is one sector of the church that ends up flowing with society and then allowing the trends of society to denote the standards in the church. And that is very, very dangerous. You know, I read this interesting story about an old man who wanted to teach future generations a lesson. So he wrote as his epitaph on his tombstone, he wrote this poem. It goes like this. Pause. Now imagine you're walking to the graveyard and then you see this tombstone. It goes like this. Pause, dear stranger. When you pass me, pause. Where you are, I once was. Where I am, you will be. So prepare for death and follow me. So that was what he wrote on his tombstone. And then this young man came and he read what's there, and he wasn't too satisfied with the answer. So he scribbled at the bottom on the tombstone in response. He said, to follow you, I'm not content until I know which way you went. And I think that's absolutely true, right? We don't just want to follow the trends of society blindly, but we want to know where society is actually taking us. If not, we may all end up in the wrong place. Okay, we may all end up like the Tokyo train station, you know, where you literally don't need to walk during peak hour. You know, you literally stand there and the crowd will carry you into the train and the crowd will carry you out. Now, unfortunately, we also live in a sex-crazed world today, and we need to not allow society to actually dictate for us the standards that we need to live by. Now, in the church in Corinth, there was one sector that just allowed their sex-crazed city to drive them. On the other hand, there's another group where they fight it. They allow the pendulum to swing to the other end, and they begin to, in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1, it says, it is good for a man not to marry. So that became the mentality of the people, some people in Corinth. Okay, and this is another sector of the church that allowed the pendulum to swing to the other end. And they begin to think that it's best not to be married at all, not to have sexual relationships at all. And sex became a bit of a taboo. So they look at sex as being something repulsive, something unclean. So they urge engaged couples not to go through with a marriage. They urge Christian couples to forego sexual intercourse. They urge Christian spouses to actually leave their non-Christian partners. So the Apostle Paul had to step in and then give a balanced view so that the pendulum does not go to the other end. So you see where the pendulum swing are. First, there's one group that just flow with the sex-crazed society they're in. The other is they just fight this and then just decide that they're not going to get married. They just go into the other extreme. So he took on both extreme views, the Apostle Paul, and then he addressed them with wisdom and balance. Okay? And there are many godly men and women that we all know that actually remain single, like our Lord Jesus Christ himself, the Apostle John, the Apostle Paul, Mother Teresa. 1 Corinthians 7:1 uses the word good, which is the word kalon, which can be translated lovely, beautiful. So Paul begins to show us now from these verses, that I'm going to read for you now, that whether you are married or single, it is dependent on three things. Number one, gifting. Okay, number one is gifting. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 7, Paul wrote this, I wish that all men were as I am. Okay, in other words, Paul is saying that he's single and he wished that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. So here in this context, the Apostle Paul is obviously referring to the gift of celibacy, and on one hand, and then the gift of marriage on the other hand. So, in other words, what Paul is saying is both singleness and marriage, they are gifts from God. Okay, can I say it again? Whether singleness and marriage, they are both gifts from God. They are just different seasons of life. Some people will be single for this season, others will be married. Okay, and there is also such a thing as a gift of celibacy, which enables people to actually not want to get married. So that's a gift of celibacy. So one is gifting. Secondly, is calling. Okay, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 17 now. Here's what Paul says. Nevertheless, each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned to him and to which God has called him. So if God's call for this season in your life is for you to be single, then be single and satisfied. But if you are already married, then stay married and happy. Okay, whatever the station, whatever the place in life God has assigned to you, then whatever the season that God has called you into, just stay there. Okay, so number one, gifting. Number two, calling. Number three is devotion or devoting. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 35. I'm saying this for your own good, Paul says, not to restrict you, but that you may live in the right way, in undivided devotion to the Lord. Now, there are people who have remained single because they choose to devote total devotion to the Lord. And this to me is one of the biggest advantages of being single. They actually are able in that season of their life to give total devotion to the Lord and to be able to serve with total devotion. And I think there's a place for that. Okay, so it's either by gifting, by calling, or by devoting. Now, there are those who choose to remain single so that they devote themselves fully to the work of the Lord. And why not? And if you are in this season of singleness, I think you can turn it into a season of complete devotion to God, the lover of your soul. Is marriage the ultimate will for my life? Maybe not, but conformity to Jesus Christ is. As this single lady wrote so beautifully, this is what she wrote. Every morning when I first awaken, I thank the Lord that by His grace and His plan, I was single at this point, doing what He wants me to do. Acknowledging that God's perfect plan for me was in force each day brought me to a place of acceptance. As I was faithful to apply the balm of thanksgiving, God lifted me out of every low period that came along. In other words, this sister is showing us that because she recognized that this season of her life is singleness, and she has devoted it fully to live life to the full and to serve God with undivided devotion, she was able to find her balm of thanksgiving and acceptance. And if God considers you lovable enough to give you His own Son for your eternal security, I want to encourage you, you should also recognize your own worth, that you are the pearl of great price. You are the apple of His eyes. You are beautiful, you are special, and you are precious, you are lovable, simply because you are you. And I want to just say to you who are single, and as a pastor, I will say to you that I so appreciate every one of you, and I affirm you for this season of your life. And I'm grateful that you dare to wait for God's best. You dare to trust God's timing. You dare to believe that you deserve to be loved, and you dare to be you. And I'll say to you, you are single either for a season or you are single for a reason. Now you may ask, how do I know which is which? Then I'll say that as long as you still have it in your heart, have you that desire in your heart to be married, then you are single for a season. And if you ever reach that point where it doesn't matter anymore, but you actually are devoting your life to something else, then you are now single for a reason. And so as long as you have that desire to be married, I encourage you, you are only single for this season, and you never know when the right one will come along. But as long as you are single, I encourage you to make the best of this season in your life. And now I'm so happy to be able to pass the time back to Dave and take us into a time of the panel. I'm looking forward to hear what they have to say, because they have really lived through this season of singleness. So Dave, back to you.
Amazing. Thanks, Pastor Benny. Well, we're about to go into our panel, have some Q&A time. So please, before we get into that, make sure that you have typed in any burning questions that you have on your heart. Remember, you can also vote for the most popular questions that you would like to get answered. The ones that are most popular are most likely to get answered in the time that we have tonight. So while you do that, let me just take a moment to plug the ministries that are bringing this webinar tonight to you. There are two organizations that you can partner with to be able to bless the body through these webinars. The first of them is FCC, Faith Community Church, which is the church that we're at right now. You can head to fcc.live, and there will be giving options and details there. The second organization is Arrows Resources in Singapore, and those details are also on the screen. The pay now and the bank details should be showing up as I speak. So if you would like to partner and support with us, your generosity is much appreciated, and it helps us to do what we do week to week. Cool. So before we get going, let me introduce to you our panelists for tonight. First of all is the great Pastor Benny. You know him already. He's been married for over 30 years, so his season of singleness ended quite a long time ago. He'll be answering some questions tonight. On my left over here, we have Nicolette. Nicolette is one of the kids' church leaders here in or one of the main church kids' church leaders in our church. She is in her 20s and still single, so she'll be answering from that perspective and the things that she has experienced about it. On my far left, we have Jude and Lou. Jude and Lou have recently been married, so they went through a season of extended singleness, and so they'll be able to answer questions from that perspective as well. So we have people here from all different stages of life. So get your questions in right now. We're going to start with the first one. Cool. So the most popular question is this. How do we deal with loneliness or companionship, lack of companionship, I guess, when we do not have any partner? Maybe let's go with Nicolette. As someone who is still single, how do you deal with loneliness, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so as Pastor Dave kindly mentioned, I am still in my 20s, just shy of 30, but I haven't been single for like decades on decades and decades. And I think by God's grace, I haven't battled with loneliness, and I haven't battled with the sort of pressing desire to be married. Maybe 10 years ago, I might have, but really in the recent 5 or 6 years, it's not something I really deal with. And I think God has really surrounded me with an incredible community. This community is made up of my family, my friends, my Connect group, just people that I love, people that love me and care for me. And so I feel like my cup is overflowing with love, and I really have this fullness of joy that I don't really battle with loneliness. So I don't know if that is encouraging to you at all, whether you can pray for a community, but God really supplied me with every connection and relational friend or person that I needed in my life. So I don't really feel lonely. It's not something that I deal with.
Cool. So you're talking about having companionship from other sources, as opposed from just from boyfriend, girlfriend, or life partner.
Yeah, like I feel very deeply connected to a lot of people. Obviously, God is my first and foremost important connection, but He has also supplied me with real people in my life, like my parents and my friends, and I don't feel lonely. That's not something that I actually endure, but I'm not sure if that's helpful.
Jude and Lou, maybe, do you have anything different to add to that, dealing with loneliness?
Well, I'll go first on this occasion. Before I actually met Lou, life, takes you in different ways. I had different passions but mostly I also found God. And like I said, I served more and more, not expecting anything. And all of a sudden, Lou showed up in my life. So definitely, it was something that I grew as I grew closer to the Lord. I did many things. I was a passionate motorbike rider, traveled extensively. But then all of a sudden, I met Lou, and my life has totally changed, for sure, for the good. So,
Awesome.
So there was one side of being, single, so you get to do what you wanted to do and all this, but definitely being married is a total different experience, and it's something that you can't explain. So I'll pass you on to Lou if she has to say something about it too.
I guess loneliness is quite an interesting concept. Perhaps I could definitely say there were times that I felt that I wanted someone that I could really, really be myself with, and who would share in my hopes and dreams for the future. I think the most important way that I dealt with loneliness was really, I think, literally crying out to God, and just crying and maybe presenting my feelings to God. And then at the same time, I also did what Nicolette was talking about, how I proactively made lots of friends, and I opened myself up, shared my life with friends at work. So I took chances and risks, and just talked to the people that I worked with, and then did lots of activities, and somehow also made friends in different areas. So I did fitness dancing, I did Zumba, made friends at Zumba and the gym, and went on holidays, talked to people on cruises and on holidays, and made friends with them, and visited them, when I traveled, and shared my heart out with them. Then did a different sort of dancing and made friends at the dancing, shared my heart with them, and then that's how I met Jude. But that's another story.
Great. Yeah. Cool. So what I'm hearing is that there are many other ways to find community and companionship that don't necessarily need to be found in a life partner. Yeah. So that's what I think the common link.
If I can add something, I think I was very greatly helped with the book that I read. It's an old book written by Richard Foster, entitled The Celebration of Disciplines. And in his book, there's a chapter on solitude and silence. And that chapter really helped me to understand that a person can be alone and not be lonely. It's because the inner recesses of the heart is being filled by the presence of God, and that ability to spend time alone with God is the starting point of turning the desert of loneliness into a garden of solitude that is inside of us. And that is a turning point for me, because you could actually even be married and still feel lonely because of the inner emptiness that cannot be filled by anybody even except God. So that was a helpful thing. So if you want, you can pick up a book, Richard Foster's book, and read the chapter on silence and solitude. It was a real game changer for me when it comes to tackling loneliness.
Cool. Not a sponsored ad.
yeah, it's not a sponsored ad.
Great. Next question. Another popular one. This is for those who are who have that desire to be to find a life partner, and they're asking, how do I know if I am idolizing that desire? So, on one hand, we have the healthy desire to to have someone or to find a life partner. But how do we know if that has become or taken too much of a place in our hearts? Anyone at any time?
I guess I would say, in answer to that, can we let it go? Easy question, I suppose. If we, or if ask ourselves, if we don't end up finding someone, can we manage that? Can we accept that? Can we even be happy with that?
Cool. Yeah. Great. Good. That's really helpful. Can you let it go?
Yeah, I think maybe I will jump in also. When I think of myself in my early 20s, I was pretty boy crazy. So I was obsessed with boys. I was always talking to boys. I was always texting boys. I was always going out on dates. And so I was very consumed by the thought of dating someone. And actually really God intervened, and he was like, are you consumed with this idea of being with someone, or are you consumed with the idea of being with me? And I think that was something I needed to hear at the time, because I was starting to really chase after this idea of this perfect relationship more than I desired to spend time with God, more than I desired to get to know God. And so my prayer my prayer very slowly changed to really asking God to help me let go of that. And it was really a journey of surrender at the end of the day. And it still continues to be a journey of obedience. So I don't know if that's helpful to anyone, but the whole seek ye first and that whole the whole idea that God is first in my life has been this huge journey, and it continues to be, I think, and that's been the most helpful to me in terms of letting it go.
Great. So the idea of surrender is a really good one. I think that's the same for any kind of desire that we have in our lives, right? Our desire for wealth, our desire for family, our desire for career progression, for comfort. How do we know if it's an idol? Are we willing to lay it down? Are we willing to surrender it to God? So yeah, really good points. Thanks, everybody. Here's one, which is a bit more personal, but it comes from an anonymous person who says, human beings, since we are made to be sexual beings in nature, how do we deal with that desire before we get married? Especially, I guess, if you are going through longer periods of singleness, and you don't get married young and all that kind of things. So anyone want to speak into that?
I think out of this panel here, I'm probably have been single the longest. I think one of Pastor Benny's points is about acknowledging the desire, and I think unfortunately, or I don't know, the fact is probably it's something the church is quite maybe in church, it's quite hard for people to acknowledge that they have feelings of desire and have, I guess, upfront to sort of acknowledge that for fear of thinking they are addicts and or sex addicts and sex crazed, that sort of thing. I think importantly we acknowledge that, perhaps talk with valued friends who can provide sound advice or as a listening board, and then for me is surrendering that to God and finding some of the outlets through different sort of energies. So for me, activities, some like Zumba and the dance fitness and dancing was very much that helped me a lot. And then I think not to become too consumed by that as well, so that there's a lot more. A lot of things in life that's also important, and it's like when we acknowledge it and then at the same time look for other ways of fulfilling our needs, it sort of goes away. It doesn't become like in your face so much.
Yeah. Great. Good thoughts.
I think another point that we could make here would be that men can actually live without sex, but we cannot live without companionship. So sometimes while there is the biological need that's there, but at the same time there is that mindset that we think that what we need is sex, when actually what we really need is companionship. So like what you say, Lou, when you get involved in activities, you channel your energy somewhere else, and that's where all the companionship comes in as well, and that's what fulfills our need actually. Yeah. I don't know, anyone else would like to contribute to that?
If not, we can always move on. So good. All right, I guess a good follow-up question to that, slightly less related, but sort of, is what are practical ways that the church can help? What can the church do to celebrate the season of singleness? Because you were mentioning that the church isn't great at acknowledging that sometimes people can have these desires and feelings, and it's almost like a taboo subject. So what can we do? What are practical ways? Maybe PB, as a church leader, you can answer this. Or what can the church do to help?
Well, for one thing, I take opportunities like that to actually affirm the season of singleness, and I think it's a season where our young people can actually devote themselves fully to the Lord and devote themselves to live life to the fullest, and we want to affirm that. I think that's one thing we can do. The second thing we do want to do is to be able to create platforms where young people can actually interact. Singers can actually can create community, and that's another thing that we can do intentionally. And that's where I think having connect groups that are demographically homogeneous, I think is also helpful, because then we are putting together all those that would be in that season of singleness, and who knows, we can facilitate some relationships to form. So those are practical things that we can do, and I believe that a lot of churches are trying to do that.
Maybe from you, Nicolette, as someone who's single, what would you like to see a church do to celebrate your this season of your life that you're in, and not make you feel pressured that you have to be with someone right now,
Yeah.
I think the mindset of a single person having marriage as their ultimate goal, that needs to be shattered, because that is not my ultimate goal. And I think I would speak for a lot of single people when we say getting married is not my goal. So every time you see a single person, make sure it's not one of the first few questions that you ask them. Hey, so no boyfriend yet? And things like that. It's just very unhelpful. I've been told many things and been given many pieces of unsolicited advice about how I can get out of my single season, about what I need to do to change, to be a better prospect for men, or what I can be, what I can do to change my mindset so then I'm more marriage material. And I get very passionate when I speak about this, because I think for me, I'm very blessed, and by the grace of God, He has given me, as Pastor Dave very kindly pointed out to me earlier this week, a very thick skin. And these sort of comments really slide off my back. But I would say that some of these comments might actually be harmful to someone who is still grappling with the identity with Christ, who is still surrendering this issue to God, who might be really battling singleness. That might be something that's very hard for them. And so if your constant comments and constant questioning and constant probing into their life, their very private life, which is first of all none of your business, second of all really quite difficult for them to go through, then maybe what you say has a huge impact. Is it encouraging them? Is it edifying them? Is it pointing them towards God? If not, perhaps change the questions that you ask them. Maybe just ask how their week's been. It's not helpful if uncles and aunties are trying to set me up with someone every other week, or gives me the list of single men in the church. I know all of you guys. So yeah, I just think it's not very helpful, because for me, I'm so blessed that it doesn't affect me, but it could actually be very hurtful because you're reinforcing the idea that maybe they're not good enough, they're not worthy, they need to change, when really they just need to trust in God. So I think in terms of that mindset, practically as a church, be very mindful of the questions that you speak, and the things that you speak, and the questions that you ask to single people. Because it can be hurtful for some.
So as a follow-on question from that, does that mean, so where then is the place to discuss this? So let's say amongst someone who is single, to actually talk about, hey, like, how are you journeying with finding a life partner, or how are things going in that area of your life?
Yeah.
Where would you draw the boundaries? Because obviously it's not going to be a totally taboo subject that we just all steer clear from. Like, never ask a single person anything about relationships.
Yeah. I agree with that. I'll just speak again, as usual. But I think, so it's not a taboo subject, but it's the thought behind your question. It's like, how come you're still single? I don't get it. Have you even looked in this place? Have you even tried doing this? That sort of tone and that sort of kind of attitude towards singleness, it's like this really bad thing that I'm going through. I see it as the ultimate gift that God has ever given me, that I can now have such joy just being with God, and that I prefer His company to anyone else, and it's the best thing ever. And so when you're approaching someone and you really truly care for them, I think it's obvious, I do have people that come up to me and they're like, hey, how's it going? Are you dating anyone? As a very sort of open-ended question rather than an accusation. And also, just don't ask them every time you see them. It's just not necessary. If you truly care about them, you've been praying and God's like, hey, maybe like check up on this person. Sure, that's great. Do that. But maybe not every Sunday.
I think what's important also is the context of relationship, right? How well do you know the person? Are you actually a friend of that person? It opens up doorways to be able to discuss more personal matters. Maybe it's not something that you want to ask someone who you don't really have that close of a relationship with. It's like one of those kind of are you pregnant questions, right? Yeah. It's like you don't just go up to any woman and just ask, are you pregnant? You could get a slap for that. In the same way, but in the context of relationship, there is a space to ask. Yeah. There is a space to ask that. Yeah. So relationship is one of the key factors there. Unless anyone has anything to add to that, I'll move into another question. Yep. Sweet. How do I know if God's call for me during this season is to be single? And will being proactive during the season then be going against what I guess it's a question of God's will, God's calling for me right now?
Oh, that is a very good question. I think I probably would have grappled with that question myself. At the same time, probably also acknowledging that I would like to be married. So there was Pastor Benny right at the end of his talk said something about, we ask ourselves are we single for a season? And then at some point, are we single for a reason? And I was very quickly reflecting on that and thinking that I almost sat with both of them at the same time. And thinking that I very likely could be single for the rest of my life and being prepared for that, accepting that. And almost also at the same time saying to God, I would like to be married. It would be really nice to be married. And my personal experience was like every year on my birthday, I will say, God, is it this year? Is it this year? And then interestingly, when I didn't pray anymore, I met
That
Jude.
was the year.
Yeah, that was the year. And but I would also have heard lots of stories from other people saying, when you least expect it, you will meet someone. And I was like thinking, how could I least expect it? What is the least expect? And really,
let me reverse engineer this so I don't expect it to get one.
Right. It was very interesting because really now I will have to say that it happened when I least expected it. Yes, when I stopped looking. But then like Dave was saying, at the same time you kind of think, what is the least expected? You're trying to work it out, and I think at the end it's all about that surrender. So if the surrender, and I think most important too was, what is God's call for my life in the now, in the present moment, and if I'm doing something that is bringing meaning, helping others, I feel that God has placed me, and like in my case, God's placed me with my Zumba friends, with dancing friends, people outside the church. I felt that was the call. And whether I was there as a single person or whether I was there about to meet someone, didn't matter. Yeah. Right now, that's the most important. Yeah. So I think that's kind of my take on that question.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I think an important part of this question also is the asking of how should relationships be formed? Is it first God's call and desire, and then my own personal desire becomes subject to that? Or is it my desire then submitted to God and saying, God, is it your calling for me at this season? Do you know what I mean? It's like, should I, even if I have the desire, totally cut it off if I'm sensing that God is calling me to be single?
I actually think that God's call is not something that you search for, but it's something that as you live your life, it unfolds itself. So that's why I like how Paul puts it in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, because the way he puts it is that it's not a desperate search, but it is but Proverbs would say it is an uncovering. So it's almost like God reveals it to you rather than you are searching for it desperately. So it's the same with that life partner thing. It's not a desperate, craving, demanding search, but it is a uncovering as you live life. Yeah. And as you do life, it happens. And you're dancing away, Lou, right? And the next thing you know, you found the one.
In actual fact,
microphone.
Oh, sorry, I have to put the microphone up. In actual fact, before I actually approached Lou, I had many strangers confirm to me, you dance well together. Are you guys together? So they kept saying to me, if you don't ask her, you don't know whether she's going to go out with you.
That's right.
This is people who we never, I never knew, just off telling me, you'll dance very well together. Are you all together? So finally, the last person told me, no, you better ask her out. And that's how I actually got a confirmation that
Right.
this is meant to be for us.
Yeah.
And I did approach
It's
Lou.
so organic, right? It's so natural. It's not clamoring for something, it just evolved. Beautiful.
Great. Great. I hope we answered that question. If we didn't, ask it again in some different way and maybe we'll get back to it. I'd like to lump the next two questions together because I think they're related. One is, how do I, if I have the intense longing to be in a relationship or to be married, how do I deal with that emotionally? So we talked about that. We don't want to idolize it. We want to surrender that feeling to God. But how do you deal with it? I mean, like, it's easy on the surface to say, oh, just surrender it to God. But what does that mean? What does that look like in my day-to-day? What if I have these feelings? How do I cope with that? And attached onto that is, especially, how do we cope with, being single and all those desires, especially when the peers around you are all getting attached and married?
Yeah. I think for me, it is you start by being honest with yourself, honest with your feelings, because that desire to be married is a God-given thing also. It's not a wrong thing. And therefore, we should not deny it, but rather to acknowledge it. But at the same time, don't undermine your own faith to believe that you can be married, even if you have gone on in years. Because there is nothing to say that you cannot get married at 50. There's nothing to say that. I have met several friends already who experience very long seasons of singleness, and then in the end they actually are happily married in a very late season of life. And I've noticed that each one of them was seeking to live life to the full, and they never at any point undermine their own faith. They actually believe that God can send them the right person somewhere along the way. And so because that is the case, they understand that they are single for that season. And I believe that the day when it doesn't matter to you anymore, you have come to a full acceptance that you'll be happy to remain single to the end of life, then I think from that point on, you switch from being single for a season to single for a reason. You would have found a reason for staying single. And you come to that place of acceptance. But I've also seen people struggle through that phase. Between the season to the reason, they struggle through it. And I actually have one sister friend, I remember, I think she hits about 40-something. And then suddenly one day, she called us to her office and she just poured her heart out and just say, I've been praying, I've been doing everything, but I haven't got anyone. And she literally cried before us, and all we could do was just to pray for her. But a few years down the road, I saw that she has completely come to a place of acceptance and actually became a happy, fulfilled person. And still single, and it's because she just transited from single for a season and somehow became single for a reason and happily single now. But she did go through that struggle, and it's very real. But she found a few friends that she could pour her heart out, and that was helpful for her. And there's no easy answer to some of these things because everybody's wired differently. I don't know how you feel.
I think emotionally, so it's important to acknowledge that emotionally and then to try and channel that towards making good friends and persisting in friendships, because the you could say skill or relationship or your ability to be in a relationship, that's seen in friendships first of all. And I think if we can acknowledge the desire for relationship, but also then to start making friends, making and keeping friends, and maybe deepening friendships, that would be a very good place to channel that into. At the same time, you kind of say, well, there's nothing wrong with kind of keeping your eye out.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
could still do both. You can, be prepared, look out for someone who possibly, at the same time, you are investing your emotions and your love, your giving, caring into other friendships, and trying to broaden that out as much as possible. At least that was, for me, I could say, I just have loads of friends,
Yeah.
and I love them, and I think, and I am confident they love me
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So other channels are really important. Yeah, I think sometimes it is a misconception in our head that those emotions can only be channeled in one way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like the feeling that you want a relationship doesn't necessarily have to be fulfilled within the specific context of a romantic relationship.
Right.
But yeah, did you have anything else to add to that? Emotionally dealing with really wanting to be married all the time.
Yeah, and I think I dealt with, I deal with the whole peer comparison because I am turning 30, and at this stage in my life, it's quite normal for people to be getting married, having babies, buying houses, kind of moving on in these life stages. And I live at home with my mum and dad. And I think when I felt really desperate, and when I felt really insecure, and when I felt really like, how come all my friends are in these really stable relationships and someone like me can't get into one? I realized that was such a selfish and egotistical thought. It's like, oh, I deserve it just as much as this person. Why can't I have it? It was like an entitlement thing. And then yet another round of surrender and repentance, and like, oh God, like, you are the only one that I need. So it kind of like, it was this cycle of constantly feeling like I'm good, and then having these thoughts, and then coming back to repentance and surrendering it to God. And, this sort of perfect, peaceful rest in God grows in me, I think. And I can't remember the last time I was feeling emotionally displaced or distressed, or it is painful. There's like these pangs of pain that are almost physical, that you're like, oh, I just want a boyfriend. And I remember them, but that was 10 years ago. So, and I think God is so gracious. He's so faithful. He's so awesome, and he so fulfills every of those gaps of emptiness, that I think if you bring it to God and you surrender it to Him, I think He really, He pours out more than you think.
Yep. Great answers, everybody. Thanks for sharing. Well, we've got time for a couple more questions. Keep asking, and hopefully we'll get to them. Here's one, an interesting one. As a single, how do I not look at people without subconsciously thinking of them as a potential?
That's a good one.
So how do I...
I think you can't. You probably. And then when it got to, it got to my stage. Well, and then when the only other guy who comes to, well, I guess in my case, I hung out with a lot of people, and then so it's true. I think that's the fact of life. There's a single guy, and you wonder if other people are pairing you with them. And then you also wonder. So anyway, actually, really, the truth is, it was Jude. And then I did look and said, oh, is he a possibility? And then the other thing is, after that, I found out, oh, he's a Christian. Oh, yay. But then I was like, oh, sorry. He knows the story anyway. I was like, oh, but he's he's a bit boring.
You don't talk to me.
He didn't talk very much. So I was like, oh,
'Cause I'm a good
never
listener.
mind. I said, so I guess the thing is, you can't really not look. Look, it's fine. You know, ask yourself, is this a potential? But I like the way that how Pastor Benny unpacked it. You don't look with that sort of desperation. You kind of look with, oh, well, if it happens, it happens, which it did for us. But I wasn't looking. It was like, oh, is this a possibility? You hold it very lightly.
Would you be able to give any tips, any of you can speak to this, about whether you have, you're starting to look at this a bit too much, you know what I mean? Like, for someone, how can they tell? Am I desperate? Or am I just open? What would some checks be that you'd give to someone? Because a lot of the times we're not aware. We're not self-aware enough to be able to tell this. So how could you set somebody free today and help them realize that they are they're in a healthy level of just, okay, look, there's people around me, their potentials, but it's all good. It's at a healthy level, healthy boundaries, or I am way out of my league here.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I can tell you about that. Because it doesn't happen intentionally. It happened because my best friend found himself a girl, and that put me back to dancing. And I've never seen Lou in the dance studio before. We crossed paths many times, but we never met each other. And all of a sudden, I go back to the studio, and there Lou sitting right in front of me, not knowing that I was a part of the same studio for many months before, or even a year and a bit before. And I'm pretty sure straight away we never thought we were for each other. But as things around us started to shape up, because we started going out together, we went out as groups together, and Lou was not good just to me, she was good to everyone. So it was a pretty hard one to pick initially, but as we got to know each other personally, we felt that we were coming together. And so that's what made me, gave me the thing to approach Lou. So it does show up somehow. As, you know, if God's in it, or if God wants you to be together. So it does show up.
I think what for Jude was also saying to me when we started going out, he was also kind of prepared that I would say no. So that's kind of also like holding it very lightly. You know, this not being too desperate. So it was being proactive, as Pastor Benny was suggesting with the men, with Christian men, saying, being proactive.
You have to be, I think. You have to be. If you sit at home watching TV, you're not going to meet somebody. You have to be out there.
So it's like he was proactive at the same time. This was after I said, yes, okay, we'll try going out. But he was also prepared to, you know, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't like, he was prepared to let go, prepared to be friends, and sort of step back again. And I think it's maybe even more so for men, the risk of getting rejected probably, there's a risk of embarrassment, risk of not the rejection, like what would that mean if we're in a group of friends? So like for us, we're in a group of friends. So it was a big risk, but you're also prepared. So I think that sort of tells you the attitude to take, so not being too desperate.
Would you like to add anything to this, Pastor?
Probably one mark that I would, you want to draw a line somewhere, would be when you become manipulative. You know, by that I mean when you start to not be yourself, and you actually want to be somebody else in order to get into that relationship. So when deceit, when manipulation starts coming in, you know that you're crossing a line somewhere. You're becoming it means too much now, to a point where you are willing to compromise some things. And I don't think it's healthy anymore.
Yeah.
So that will be one indicator.
One marker.
I think you're crossing the line somewhere.
Helpful.
Yeah.
Nice. Good. Alrighty. Here's another question. Another two actually, which I'd like to lump together, related again. This is a sentiment that is echoed by a lot of people. You talked last week about the well. The well is where you go to find a life partner. That's what you mentioned, and that's the church. And a lot of people have the feeling that I'm single, but the well is very dry. So, like I'm a single girl, and there's not. And I'm in a church that is full of other single girls, and there are not many guys, or maybe even vice versa, the other way around. What should I do? And linked onto that is, what are your thoughts on dating apps? Is that another place that Christians should go or can go to find a life partner? I know historically there's a bit of taboo around it, and also depending on the apps, and there's historically not a great history with certain apps as well on finding real, lasting, committed, great Christian relationships. So what should you do if you're in this situation? You have a desire, the well is dry, the pond is small, whatever your analogy for it. The fish are gone.
Okay.
What do you do?
Okay. Maybe let me address the well one, and then I'll pass the dating apps over to the young lady there, because I think it's more up her alley. I've never seen one before, so I won't be able to address that. But as far as the well is concerned, I think I did remember saying last week that the well is not just your own local church. I think is anywhere that is within the family of God. So you can actually enlarge your pond beyond your own local church. Although the local church, of course, you're likely to find one that will share the same passion, share the same DNA as far as the spiritual life is concerned. But having said that, I think the pond is bigger than just your own local church. So please feel free to participate in some other activities that you can pond drop here and there, I guess. Yeah.
Nowadays, the church does encourage whether you have churches interacting with other churches.
I think there's a place for that. In some sense, it just creates that opportunity for cross-pollination to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on that, before we get to the apps, on that, if someone feels that their well is dry, their church doesn't have many eligible people, should we tell them that it's okay? Is it okay for them to change church for that reason? Because we're talking about pond hopping, and there's.
I mean, first things first is that while I acknowledge that there's a need that the young people have, and then there's a need for that, but I think there are also where God has planted us is also something that really comes from God, and we don't. I think for anyone to just change a community just for the sake of that, it does call into question a lot of other things about our own personal walk with God. So I would not state that categorically that if your pond is dry, please go somewhere else, because then it has made finding a life partner our primary pursuit, which I don't think is the most healthy thing to do. But having said that, I would say that to all those who may be in a pond that is smaller, or a pond where you don't have that many single men, God is able, to let your path cross with people that may not be in the context of the local church. You could meet them in the workplace, you could meet them in a dance studio, you could meet them in activities. So it's not it would be unhealthy to think of the church purely as a place to find a life partner. because that's not what it's primarily meant for. And I want to encourage all those who may be looking for a life partner, but you could be advanced in age. The bottom line is this: never undermine your own faith to believe God to send someone to you if you still have that desire to be married. And don't just look at circumstances as I am now or my age, etc., and think that it's the end, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. So never, as long as you still have that desire to be married, don't undermine your own faith to believe God for someone. Yeah, and God is able to engineer circumstances and let your path cross with the right person at the right time.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's the tension between being proactive as well.
Yeah.
One could say, well, if there's nothing wrong with me going to another God loving, God fearing church, biblical base, good solid beliefs.
Yeah. Are there actually Christian apps, dating apps that are around?
Christian sites, yes, I think it's not particular apps, maybe, but there are Christian dating sites, and I did join one. Largely was this probably a bit like what you're saying about pressure. It was sort of pressure from a friend of mine saying, you should, because you are not being proactive enough. So this is where you are not being proactive enough. How can you find anyone if you are, because probably at that time I was staying home and watching TV and so I thought, oh, well, all right, let's try. It's very unlikely, but okay, I'll do that. And I wouldn't recommend it. It's not that I actually didn't really meet anyone. There was one. We went out for a meeting, for coffee. It was uninteresting, and I thought, oh no, I will never do this again. And I think maybe it just there's it's a bit more like, oh, I'm meeting you with the idea of checking you out. Is it possible? So for me, I wouldn't do that. And I think, and it was after that, I just closed all the accounts, and I thought, it's really, I want to focus on God. I want to focus on where He's placed me, and just be who I am, be happy, whatever He's called me to do. And if He brings someone to me, good. If it doesn't happen, I accept, and I will be happy being single.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
that's it.
Yep.
How about you, Nicolette, as the youngest person here on this panel, and most tech savvy, probably? Do you have any different views on dating apps?
Honestly, I don't have much experience. I definitely get the whole, you're not being proactive enough. This is the new way of dating. You have to be on these apps to even meet someone. You have to be on these apps to even stand a chance, or you got to be going on dates. Otherwise, you're too closed off. You're too, high-handed. I'm too unapproachable, or all the things. And I really fully disagree with that. I think first of all, there are many apps out there, and I think a lot of the apps, I'd say, I've been on a ton of apps, and I just don't think I was there for the right reasons, and I don't think people are on there for really the right reasons to find life partners. I think it's not really a godly atmosphere, or like a godly sort of place to meet someone. It's very superficial, and you have this profile, and you're judging people based on all of their accolades and their photos. And it just doesn't sit well with me. So I haven't been on a dating app in probably 8 or 9 years. So I can't really comment on that because I'm not into the app dating scene. That's not to say I haven't been on a date in 8 to 9 years, but God brings men into my life, and then, we go on a date, and then I consult God. I'm like, is He the one? So far, they've all been straight no's. So I think, with the whole dating thing, there's this huge pressure to conform and to date like the world is doing it now. So you sleep with someone first, then you decide. That's just not how I role, and it's not what I want to do. So I don't partake in that activity, and so it's very, it's something that I can't comment on, I think.
That being said, in a different point of view, I do know of people who have met partners, good Christian partners, on dating apps.
Yeah.
So it is not an impossibility. I know people who have ended up married together.
Yeah.
I know people who are currently in a situation where they're dating because of a dating app. And so I wouldn't necessarily totally discourage it and say that it's not a viable way, or it's not. I wouldn't say it's wrong either. I would give caution to say that use wisdom, because it comes with its own set of challenges.
Absolutely, yeah.
And its own. It's a unique thing that we're trying to learn as a generation that has just kind of been thrust into this dating app kind of phase.
I think, sorry, I think I should have prefaced that with, because I haven't been on a dating app in many years, there's probably been many more dating apps that are much more, I guess, wholesome maybe. And I think in that sense, it just depends on, like, are you like really looking for a life partner? And for me, I'm not. So, I think also just know, like, if you're going on a dating app, like, are you ready to even be with your life partner? Are you, like, do you feel cold? Like, is God saying, like, yeah, like, someone's out there for you? Because so far, that hasn't been my what I've heard from God and what I discern to be God's plan for my current season. So I think also be very cautious about, like, throwing yourself and going on all these dates, because I think it can prove to be more distracting than helpful to your life. And to finding an actual life partner. But and I also know friends that have met on Coffee Meets Bagel. I think it's a cool thing. It's very,
so be discerning and wise is the real issue, the real principle here. Like, be aware that on a dating app, everybody's going to present their best front always, right? Because you're going on for that very purpose. So, and you're not going to really know that person from squat. You're not going to be able to see that person in any other environment but the sanitized environment that they present themselves to you in. So that's a challenge. Another challenge that, from talking with a friend who went through this, was that they felt the app actually stirred up that desire and made them more desperate, as opposed to more content in their own life. So just be aware that if that thing sending you notifications like, hey, this new person, maybe you'll be interested in them, it's just something that's just reinforcing a message to you. So be wise, be discerning. It's not a right or wrong thing, but I think you really need to discern with the power of the Holy Spirit, be prayerful about these kind of things, and how you approach them. So anyone have anything else to add to that? Cool. Maybe we have time for one last question. Let's have a look. We've got a few left. What would give the interest, the most interesting? Okay. This question is from Cheryl. She asks, again about the well. The best place to find a partner is at the well. But does that mean we shouldn't consider non-Christians? So the issue of satisfying that desire, unequally yoked, that whole argument, how do we feel about that? What does the Bible say about that? Is it really referring to the context of relationships? What if, and I always hear this, especially from people who are considering people who are non-Christians, is what if the person is great? Like, their character is nicer than most Christian men or women that they know. They're kind, they're generous, they're loving, they're patient. If the well is short, should we consider?
Well, I first of all, I want to say this carefully because there is no quick, easy answer to something like that, because it involves people's feelings, it involves people's life. And so I said it out of having observed, so many marriages that are unequally yoked, and having been through so many counseling sessions with people who are married, yoked in the wrong way, married outside of the core values and all of that, in the end, it can lead to a lot of pain. And so in the light of that, I want to encourage everyone that you trust God's timing, trust God's timing, and you deserve someone that you could actually have as a soulmate that will share with you not just in terms of the physical or even the emotional, but even spiritually. You could be one with someone and find so much joy in that. So I want to encourage you to take what the Bible says, and I do believe the Bible's principle is quite clear that we need to marry within our faith so that we share the same value system. And so in the light of that, I would still stand for not marrying outside of the faith.
Would you say then, just to give clarity, is it something that you would discourage on the basis of wisdom and experience, or would you say that the Bible considers it as a sin? Which is it's totally different, because some people would say, okay, if it's just something that's discouraged, maybe it's just something that I'll just go through, and I'll deal with the consequences as it comes. Or how does the Bible define it?
Yeah, I think when the Bible starts talking about what's the commonality between a believer and an unbeliever, between God and Belial, he's actually talking about that already. And if you consider sin to be something that, anything that hurts the heart of God, anything that actually causes our relationship with God to be estranged, then I think I would say that when you marry outside of our faith, we are putting ourselves in a position where we could end up really sinning against God. And here's the thing. Are there relationships that are unequally yoked and then in the end it turned out to be good? I think there is. But if it happens, it is really the mercy of God rather than something that we should presume on. And so I would not encourage that. So...
Well, thanks, Pastor Benny, for that answer. I hope it brings clarity if you asked that question. Well, let's wrap up tonight. I think that's all the time that we have left. Before we end, I just need to give you a couple of things that you need to know about. First of all, feel free to follow our church's social media, our Facebook and Instagram. I believe the tag's @faith.org.au. That will help you keep updated with webinars and topics like this that we present to the wider body, and hopefully we'll be able to bless you more, especially as you grapple with different issues in your life. This webinar series that we're on, the Let's Talk About series, is already uploaded on certain of our online platforms. You can actually go to the link, which is tiny.cc/FCC LTA. So that's Faith Community Church Let's Talk About FCC LTA. You'll be able to see all of our previous webinars. As the webinars go forward and are done, they will be uploaded there in the future as well. So that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you've been blessed. You have some practical handles to grapple with as you work out this season of your life. Otherwise, is there any parting words that you would like to give to us, anybody?
All good?
We're all good. Well, have a great night, everybody. We will catch you next time.